The challenge I face here on YouTube all too often is trying to say something deep about an inherently shallow topic. I'm responding to a sort of manifesto from Supreme Banana. She made a political statement about veganism, worth talking about, and a lot of my regular viewers and supporters asked me to comment on it. But I'm going to jump in at the deep end of the pool on this one. Put yourself in the position of an American citizen at the end of World War II. The United States has just won one of the largest, most violent, most terrible wars in the world. And the government in the United States is using taxpayers' money, not just to hand out cigarettes to soldiers, but to hand out millions and millions of cigarettes for free to Germans, to German civilians. It's amazing and it's bizarre, but at that time, the American government was so pro-tobacco. I don't know if they believed in this because they thought maybe in the future all Europeans would start buying tobacco exported to the United States. I have no idea what the reasoning was, but the American government was using taxpayers' money to hand out millions of cigarettes for free like candy. And huge numbers of servicemen, huge numbers of soldiers in World War II became hooked on cigarettes during their years of service in the Army. When they returned back home, they took that bad habit with them. All right? It's not really adequate to respond to that situation simply by focusing on your own personal purity, simply by engaging in a form of passive boycott and deciding, I am never going to smoke cigarettes again. The reality is you're living in a world, you would have been, let's say the year is 1950 or 1951 or something, in the aftermath of World War II, you're living in a world where cigarette companies, movie companies, television, so much of the visible culture around you is actively propounding and encouraging people to smoke cigarettes. And just recently, just a few years earlier, when World War II was winding down, the government itself, at public expense, was trying to increase the number of people addicted to this ultimately harmful drug. Okay? The parallels to veganism are all too clear. Yeah, I can decide that I personally will never eat meat again. I will never drink milk again. I will never buy leather shoes again. I live in a city where advertising glorifying those things is literally painted on the walls around me, right? Posters adorn every street. The messages promoting cheap, readily available meat, they surround me. On television, on radio, on every possible broadcast medium, in movies even to some extent. And yes, there's also a whole structure of how government and corporations and even the education system are all linked to one another in promoting the message that milk and eggs and meat are things that human beings need to eat on a daily basis or else they're going to collapse. And you know, there are other illustrations too. I think there's a fair, to some extent, the establishment is even into promoting the notion that, hey, beer isn't all that bad, or one glass of wine a day isn't all that bad, even though literally each and every serving of alcohol causes brain damage. This is the kind of cultural context we live in. Now, look, guys, on the other side, it's understandable. During World War II, would tobacco be on the top of anyone's list of political concerns? No. You're kind of distracted by some other things going on. The murders of millions of people, the sudden revelation of the atom bomb, you know, punctuating this conflict on a vast scale, the renegotiation of peace treaties and borders all over the whole world, chaos and revolution and anti-imperialist rhetoric and, you know, the disintegration of the British Empire, the emergence of new nation states. There was so much going on. For most people who cared about politics, who really cared, did they have the capacity to care about this, to care about cigarettes? It's a problem even now or at any given time for veganism. When is the question of institutional support for, political support for animal products, when is that going to be at the top of anyone's mind? So you might be expecting this video to be a sort of critique of the definition of the word vegan, and for me to complain that Supreme Banana has been trying to expand the definition of the word vegan to include people who eat meat as if they're vegan. That's not my point at all. Supreme Banana has a comment up a few days after she recorded the video where she clarifies, and I quote, "It doesn't make sense for someone who is not 100% vegan to call themselves vegan. This will just create a slippery slope, and technically anybody could be a quote-unquote vegan. I wasn't clear when I spoke about the definition. I rather meant we should change our definition of the community, not change the definition of the word. Change your definition of acceptance and what actions deserve applause, aka every true effort. I think it's okay to call yourself a part-time vegan or a transitioning vegan or working on being vegan, and honestly call yourself whatever the hell you want, but what matters is not perfection, it's the effort, the actions, and the intention." So she's saying we should applaud these people who are trying to make a positive difference, even if they're not vegan. She's not saying to change the definition of vegan itself. For me, the deepest issue here, in what's, relatively shallow set of concerns in politics, understandably so, the deepest issue here is the kind of passive mindset that can be fostered by consumer-centered activism. I think that Supreme Banana does think of veganism just as a boycott, just as a decision made by isolated individuals. Well, I understand how immoral the meat and dairy industry is, so I am going to change my lifestyle. I'm going to reduce or eliminate my use of these things. And she just sees it in terms of that abstract mathematical formula of millions and millions of people reducing their consumption of these things, and then industry and society beyond that responding. Now, I simply don't think, if you were in the context of the year 1949 or 1951, I don't think you could honestly look at the world around you and say, this is how we're going to eliminate the smoking of tobacco. Not this alone. Of course, it's a great start. It has to start somewhere, and it has to start with you making the commitment to quit smoking. You can't really advocate for the abolition of tobacco in our society if you're still smoking yourself. It's a start, don't get me wrong. And some percentage of people are going to wake up to how harmful and dangerous tobacco is, even though there are all these other pressing political issues around you. But obviously, you need people to get organized and lobby government to change attitudes inside the halls of power, to change attitudes inside the establishment, to change attitudes even inside university departments that teach health and medicine, inside hospitals. I mean, with veganism, we deal with specialized medical professions like dietitians, and of course, oncologists and cancer specialists are involved in both the arguments about veganism and the arguments about cigarettes. There's an institutional and political dimension of this that goes far, far beyond, reducitarianism, and goes beyond a definition of vegans as merely the ultimate reducitarians, right? Vegans become the people who are engaged in that long-term struggle. And in many ways, not all, that type of struggle with cigarettes has been won. Compare the year 1950 to the year 2000 in terms of the status of cigarettes in our society. It's a tremendous transformation. People still have the freedom to choose to smoke cigarettes, but not inside a hospital, not inside a boardroom, not inside a school, not inside most government offices, right? Things have changed profoundly, even though a significant percentage of the population is still smoking tobacco, right? And the word is out. The cultural perception of tobacco has changed. And the basic fundamental medical understanding that it is a bad habit is now universally understood, even by the people who sheepishly continue to smoke tobacco, knowing that they're harming their health, knowing that in some way they're making the world a worse place by smoking tobacco everywhere. All right? The real reason why I like a strict definition of veganism, again, not to misrepresent what Supreme Banana said or why she said it, the real reason why I care about it is that my view of veganism is not passive, is not purely consumerist, it's not purely a boycott. My view of veganism is dynamic and politicized, and is about lobbying for, organizing for social change, cultural change, political and legal change. Changes in the universities, changes in how school children are taught about meat and milk and eggs, changes at every level of government, changes in how prisoners in prisons are fed, changes in how old people in old folks' home are fed, changes at every level that will have to be lobbied for and debated and ultimately won, right? Why is it that hospitals give their patients food that we now scientifically know makes them sick? It's a big question, and it's not going to be answered overnight. Hospitals are not going to easily or lightly give up feeding bacon and eggs to their hospital patients. It's absurd and it's surreal, but we still are at that level of asking those kinds of questions. School boards are not going to easily or lightly stop giving children propaganda that they ought to drink milk every day and that they ought to eat eggs every day, which really happens right now throughout the whole Western world, right? And I remember I saw photographs of this, the beef board in Australia, and the bizarre propaganda they expose children to in Australia, in the Australian school board, okay? You're never going to solve those problems with these attitudes that Supreme Banana expresses. I understand why. From a consumer-centered perspective, in terms of merely changing consumer behavior, she thinks the most important part of veganism is going out and saying to people, oh, you quit eating cheese? That's wonderful. She's just talking about positive affirmation for people who've made small efforts and recognizing those efforts and thinking in terms of the aggregate total amount of consumption being reduced, whether you have 5 million people who are reducitarians or just 5,000 people who are 100% pure vegans, right? She would rather have a larger number of people who are not really committed to the cause ethically, not really committed to the cause politically, but who are reducing their consumption, okay? I sympathize. I do. Her position is rational, right? But I'm looking at the whole picture. I'm looking at the whole process of cultural and political change. And I'm seeing, just like at the end of World War II, if the American government is supporting the cigarette industry to this extent, where they're handing out cartons of cigarettes to conquered people in Europe, they're handing out cigarettes not just to American soldiers, but to the Germans, to the people who were their enemies just a few months ago. That's how deeply the government and the industry support each other. A light bulb has to go on at some point where you say, this cannot purely be a matter of my personal purity or my encouraging others to emulate me in that purity or to do what they can to reduce their consumption. So I do think that Supreme Banana has a valid point here, although it's limited. And I think I have a valid point also. You may be shocked to learn. It is nice to be nice. If you meet someone who's just a reducitarian or someone who is inspired by the idea of veganism, but they only can appropriate a little piece of that idea into their own lives, into their own lifestyle, into their diet, or what have you. If you meet someone who still wears leather shoes and still eats a steak once a month, but is trying to reduce their impact, if you have it in your heart to be nice to them, to be encouraging to them, to be positive to them, that's basically what she's singing the praises of. She's saying it's nice to be nice. It's great to be positive and encouraging towards those people who are not vegan, who are reducitarian, because if we have 5 million reducitarians, they can significantly reduce their negative impacts on the world in terms of ecology, in terms of animal exploitation, et cetera, without being vegan. And we can recognize that and we can be nice about it. Okay, it's a valid point. It's a valid point. But I want us to move beyond a view of the world that sees us as merely reducing our negative impacts. I want us to move on to a much more dynamic model of veganism as a social movement, where we're trying to get organized to have the maximum positive impact. And you may be just getting organized with 50 people, or you may be getting organized with 500 people, or you may be getting organized with just 5. Okay? But when you're looking around and ask yourself, who are the people who I can take with me to City Hall? Who are the people I can take with me to the school board? Who are the people who are really going to have the level of verve and tenacity and talent and intelligence and dedication and self-discipline to make a difference in this broader institutional, political, and cultural context? Who's with me? It's not going to be a wishy-washy reducitarian. You're going to be looking to get into that kind of organization, political organization, with other people who are not just 100% vegan, but who are, I think, 100% vegan for the right reasons. 2 more points real quick. I'm tempted to end the video just there. Right now, I have a children's storybook about veganism. It's a storybook for children, written in Chinese, translated into English and German and Russian. It's a very sentimental and moving story, but at the end of the day, yeah, it's kind of vegan propaganda. It's explaining the concept of veganism for an audience of children and parents and kids, because they don't read this guy. In theory, the best artist for this book may be a meat eater. Maybe there's someone who's a 100% professional, great artist, who's, maybe they're a pro. They've already illustrated 10 or 20 different children's storybooks, and they can sit down with the paintbrush and do a great job illustrating the storybook and then go to McDonald's afterwards and eat a hamburger, right? But you know, I'm interviewing different artists, looking for someone to do it, and that's not what I'm looking for. It's not. I'm looking for someone who's vegan, who's really vegan, 100% vegan, not reducitarian, not vegetarian, not eating a steak once in a while. And I'm even looking for somebody who's vegan for the right reasons. Someone who's an ethical vegan, not just a health-conscious vegan or something else. You know what I mean? And ideally, someone who's an ethical vegan who's even an activist, who has, political... That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for. Why is that? Does it matter more? Does it matter more if I'm getting into a situation where I'm spending time and money? I mean, the artist is getting paid. The artist isn't working for free. And I'm collaborating with someone in a political movement, however tiny, however minuscule in this example. Who do I want to work with? I want to work with somebody who's really vegan. I want to work with somebody who's really vegan for all the right reasons. And even if you don't feel that way now, I guarantee you, as you move from a more passive view of veganism to this more dynamic view of veganism, more aspirational view of veganism, I think you'll start to feel the same way. I think if you're actually going to meetings at the school board or at a boardroom or whatever, you're just having the meetings with the vegans, when you sit down at that meeting and there are other people there who are literally eating an ice cream cone and wearing leather when they show up at the meeting, you think, this isn't what I got in the car to do. I feel let down. I feel in terms of my time and my effort. And hey, great, all kinds of causes do result in vegans collaborating with meat eaters. I've used many examples on the channel of vegans collaborating with hunters and what have you. But as with the example of cigarette smoking, if we're putting together that team of people where it's not just about me quitting smoking, it's about the fact that as a society, I want all of us to quit smoking. I want to see those legislative changes. I want to see those changes in health education. I want to see everything. As step one, I can't really advocate for that cause very well if I can't at least put together a few people who really do have the self-discipline to quit smoking themselves and to give voice to that moral cause.